Levan SAGINASHVILI is so dadgum good at arm wrestling that the most notable thing any of his opponents have done is literally just slowing him down. So today, we're going to look at everyone who has ever gotten a stop on peak Levan SAGINASHVILI. We're also going to discuss who got the most impressive stop on peak Levan. Peak Levan will be defined as Levan's professional career, or in other words, his supermatch career. Starting with Levan's very first pro supermatch ever against Dmitry Trubin. In the first round of this match, we actually see Trubin winning the center table and maybe even cracking Levan's wrist a little bit. Levan stops the hit with his back pressure, then he regrips higher onto the hand of Dmitry Trubin, crushing his radial deviation in the process. Levan then takes Dmitry right down next to the pin pad and just barely manages to get the pin in a very awkward lane. And from here forward, Levan pins Trubin easily in every following round. And this would be the start of a very consistent trend of Levan always having a shaky round 1 performance, but then improving as the supermatch goes on. Next, we'll take a look at Levan versus Vitaly Laletin in 2019. This stop was one that took place in the Battle of the Hand and Wrist, and it really took place over the course of 2 separate starts. What we see in this match is a demonstration not just of Levan's strength, but his technical adaptability. We see initially Levan is unable to defeat Vitaly's back pressure and pronation. If Levan attempts to grip a bit lower and simply bend his wrist and go sideways, Vitaly will win. Levan has one option. He must climb over the top of Vitaly's hands and defeat his radial deviation, removing Vitaly's access to power in the process. And this is exactly what we see Levan do. He leans back onto his tricep and posts up and over the top of Vitaly, moving his own hand further and further out onto the end of Vitaly's hand. You can really see what's going on by watching the direction Vitaly's index knuckle is pointing. Initially, it is pointing in an upward direction, and as the match goes on, his knuckle height continues to drop until it is finally touching the pin pad. Very impressive stop from Vitaly, but at this point, Levan had figured out the blueprint to defeat him, and it was all over. But considering the weight gap and the fact that Levan is clearly overall stronger than Vitaly in almost every single area, I found this to be extremely impressive. Moving on to the next stop on Levan SAGINASHVILI, we have to time travel all the way to 2022. Devin Larratt versus Levan. In the first round of this match off the go, we see Levan drive Devin down toward the pin pad, but he just barely doesn't get the pin. Devin gets a stop about 1 centimeter above the pad, holds Levan there for 1 or 2 seconds, and then Levan finishes the job. And as we know, this is the closest Devin ever got during the entirety of this supermatch. After this, it was just playtime for Levan. Now, as we know, there is quite a bit of controversy regarding this round 1 pin. So was this round 1 stop really a legitimate stop? Moving on to the next person to get a stop on Levan, we have Ermes Gasparini in 2023. And I think this is the first stop on Levan that really had a genuine chance. In the other stops we've looked at, sure, Levan was slowed down, but I think everyone kinda knew that it was only a matter of time before Levan regained control and defeated his opponents. The previous stops were simply delaying the inevitable. But the Ermes Gasparini match was different. On the first round of this match, we see Ermes get somewhat of a stop, but he loses his hand and wrist almost entirely. This stop didn't cause Ermes' stock to climb very much at all. Once again in round 2, Ermes kinda gets a brief stop, but if anything, this stop was probably more so caused by Levan just taking a moment to stare into Ermes' soul before he pinned him easily. Once again, Ermes' stock is not looking good. But round 3 was where everything changed. The match stops again, but this time, the match stops in the center of the table. Levan tries to drive sideways, but he feels his wrist integrity being threatened as he does so. He is forced to reset, and although Levan does begin to control the center, he still cannot finish the match. We see multiple failed pin attempts here by Levan. Ermes is holding everything off with his insane back pressure, and this is the moment where everyone lost their minds. Ermes transitions to the ugliest, coolest flop press I've ever seen. Now the match is on. Ermes isn't just slowing Levan down, but he might even have a chance of pinning him. Eventually, Ermes fouls off the front of the pad, and we restart the match. Levan goes for the flash pin as hard as he can, but once again, Ermes stops the match right above the pin pad. Again, Hermes transitions to the flop press and now begins to rock Levan's arm back and forth. He begins to open Levan's elbow flexor angle, and for the first time in years, I remember thinking that Levan Saginashvili was about to get pinned. But this time, Levan fouls off the back of the pad, and we restart one more time. And unfortunately for Hermes, he gets flash pinned 2 more times after this. Hermes does get more stops in round 5, but I don't really count that since Levan already knew that he had won, and he probably didn't care very much. And this brings us to the final notable stop on Levan Saginashvili. You guessed it, it's Devin Larratt at East versus West. On the go of this match, I think pretty much everyone who watched it was totally shocked. And I even thought Devin probably had like a 51% chance of winning because Levan had been injured, and even considering Levan's injury, I was still totally shocked. If Devin was going to get a stop, I pictured it being way later in the super match and probably in a full King's move. But somehow, Devin gets this stop center table in round 1, and it honestly looked pretty dominant. Engin Serzi asked a lot of athletes after the match what their reaction was to this round 1 stop, and pretty much everyone said they thought Devin was gonna win after seeing the match stop like that. But of course, as we know, Levan brought everyone back to reality in rounds 2 through 4 with easy flash pins. It took every last ounce of energy Devin had just to get that stop. Additionally, Levan changed up his strategy a little bit going forward. Levan continued his pretty consistent trend of looking like he's in trouble in round 1, but then he shifts into a whole new gear in the following rounds and decimates his opponents. Now, which stop out of all of these stops was the best? Which was the most impressive? I know a lot of people will probably say that Devin Larratt's stop was the most impressive, but I personally think that Hermes Gasparini had the best stop. This is partly because Hermes didn't just get one stop, he got several stops. But the main reason is that I think Hermes seriously could have pinned Levan in that match if it wasn't stopped because of the elbow foul. The match was slowly moving toward Hermes' winning side of the table over time, and Hermes was in a more efficient position than Levan was. This is because Hermes was using more skeletal structure and Levan was using more musculature. Now don't get me wrong, I think Devin's stop was very impressive, I just don't think it was as good as Hermes. Devin's stop was a different kind of stop. Devin was the very first arm wrestler to take full hand control from Levan, and he took it in the center table. This is of course no small feat, but the main difference is I just don't really think that Devin ever had a chance of pinning Levan. I just don't think he had enough arm power. I think that Hermes actually could have pinned Levan if everything lined up right, but with Devin, I think Levan always could have just flop pressed him. So I don't think it would have mattered either way. But let me know what you guys think about this. Who do you think got the most impressive stop on Levan Saginashvili throughout the course of his professional career? I do personally think it's Hermes, but I understand why someone would pick Devin's stop. And even Vitaly's stop is still very impressive in its own way. And once again, I hope this does not come across as hate on Levan, as it is intended to be the exact opposite of that. Not only is Levan the strongest puller the sport has ever seen, but he has all the technique to go along with it. The combination of these two things is the reason he has been able to compete at the highest level for so long, and he still has yet to lose a single round in his pro career. Perhaps the only opponent Levan Saginashvili will ever lose to is time.